Hello, everybody. Just get my phone up to charge. I put a bow in, and I have no idea where bows are supposed to go. I never know where bows are supposed to go. So, hopefully that's right. Hopefully that's the right spot. Hello. Back. Oh, thank you. I was just saying that I never know where bows are supposed to go. I hope that's where it's supposed to go. But I'm doing okay. How are you? Today's been kind of gloomy out here, and yeah, it's been kind of gloomy and gross out here today. Like really, really gray and dismal, and then yellow, and just ugh. How are you guys doing? Sorry if I fidget a little bit, like more than usual, because my back has just been really bothering me. I think it's partly the weather. It's been pretty gross here. Oh, I'm sorry. I think it's just a very busy time of year in general right now. like everybody has stuff going on, and yeah. Sorry for the throat clearing too. Yeah, it's been gross. I'm excited. We might be finishing the book today. The holidays are swiftly approaching. Well, we already had one, like, Thanksgiving. I would count that as a holiday in the holidays. We don't know yet. So we have a poll going on, and I'll go ahead once I update the description of the stream. I'll go ahead and link the poll in it as well. But we're currently taking votes on what the next book is going to be. It looks like it'll probably be Stardust by Neil Gaiman. I'm really excited to do another Neil Gaiman book. But we do have other options, so absolutely go up and vote. Again, I'll put that link here after the stream. But for now, if you know my Tumblr, which is the same username as here, Sky Destiny, the poll is up there with all the information. And yeah, I mean, that's where all the information for the poll is, and you can vote in the replies. You can also, I have a vote on Facebook and also Twitter as well. Yeah. And on Twitter, there's a proper poll, because I think you just can't do that on Tumblr. I feel like you might have been able to do that on Tumblr in the past, but I can't remember for sure. Oh, that's true. That's true. I didn't think about that. That Canada's Thanksgiving is like all the way in October, like earlier October, versus America's Thanksgiving, which is like the very end of November going into December, when you have like holiday season. So yeah, it's more of like a vague line here. I was gonna try to wear this really cute sweater for today. And it's not the right size. And I feel bad because, like, consistently with this particular place that I bought it from, I always end up having to return it and get a different size because, like, in some of their line, I'm one size, and then in like some other stuff from their lines, I'm another size, and I always manage to pick the wrong one at first. Sizes are annoying. Sizes are very annoying. Yeah, when is Hanukkah this year? I forget. It's hard to know because the date always, unlike Christmas, the date always changes for Hanukkah, and for Thanksgiving, at least, it's like, even though that date always changes too, it's like, you know that it's like the last Thursday in November. I am sick and tired, by the way, of doing Quoth the Author when it's dark outside already. I know it's not helped by the fact that lately I have been consistently like an hour late in starting, and I'm sorry about that. But it wouldn't make a difference even if I was starting it at 5, because it is already dark at 5. So it's already way dark at 5. It gets dark around before 4:30 here these days. So yeah. I hate the winter. December 18th. Okay. Wow, God, it's such a busy month. Busy, busy, busy. Are you guys ready to possibly end this book? We are like approaching the end. We are on the 8th inning, and then there's top of the 9th, bottom of the 9th, and then there's another part of bottom of the 9th, and then there's also the post game. Interesting. Let's see where we get up to with this. Sorry about that. I just had some food before coming on, so I think that's why I'm all like screechy. All right, well, let's get cracking. I am who I am. A few minutes later, Trisha... Wait, where did we leave off? Just curious. Oh, right. She found the path, or a path. Right. A few minutes later, Trisha got up. She walked along the road another hour until the dusk was thick around her. Off in the west, for the first time since the day she got lost, she could hear thunder rumbling. She would want to get in under the thickest clump of trees she could find, and if it rained hard enough, she would still get wet. In her present mood, Trisha hardly cared. I'm going to try to not be hurried about clearing my throat, because that's how you get hiccups. I felt them coming on, so I was scared. She stopped between the old wheel ruts, and she was beginning to unshoulder her pack when she saw something ahead in the gloom. Something from the world of people, a thing with corners. She resettled her pack straps and crept towards the right side of the road, peering like a person who has grown nearsighted but is too vain to wear spectacles. In the west, thunder rumbled a little louder. It was a truck, or the cab of one, rearing out of the matted undergrowth. Its hood was long and nearly buried in woods ivy. One wing of the hood had been flung up, and Trisha could see that there was no engine inside. Ferns grew where it had been. The cab was dark red with rust, tilted to one side. The windshield was long gone, but there was still a seat inside. Most of its upholstery had rotted away or been chewed away by small animals. More thunder, and this time she could see lightning shiver inside the clouds, which were advancing rapidly and eating the first stars as they came. Ooh, what cool imagery! Again, not necessarily imagery that a 9-year-old might think of, but I always end up getting hiccups from trying to clear my throat. It's really, really annoying. But yeah, so that's a really cool thing of imagery. The more thunder, and this time she could see lightning shiver inside the clouds. You can picture that really well, which were advancing rapidly and eating the first stars as they came, as like the cloud cover rolls in. Trisha broke off a branch, reached through this open space where the crank-out windshield had been, and beat at the seat stuffing as briskly as she could. The quantity of dust which rose was amazing. It came drifting out through the windshield cavity and window holes like mist. Even more amazing was the flood of chipmunks that came boiling up from the floorboards, squeaking and fleeting out through the lozenge-shaped rear window. "Abandoned ship!" Trisha cried. "We've hit an iceberg! Women and chipmunks for—" She got a lungful of dust. The result— "Don't scare the chipmunks. They found that place fair and square, ma'am." The resultant coughing fit racked her until she sat down heavily with her beating stick in her lap, gasping for a clear breath and half in a faint. She decided she wasn't going to spend the night in the cab of the truck after all. She wasn't afraid of a few leftover chipmunks. Not even of snakes, if there were snakes in residence. She guessed the chipmunks would have moved out long since. But she didn't want to spend 8 hours breathing dust and coughing herself blue. I mean, she already has a lung infection or whatever, which sounds like way more serious than I think it is. Respiratory infection, I'll say, from being sick. But she didn't want to spend 8 hours breathing dust and coughing herself blue. It would be great to sleep under an actual roof again, but that was too high a price to pay. Trisha made her way through the bushes beside the truck cab and then a little way into the woods. She sat down under a good-sized spruce, ate some nuts, drank some water. She was getting low on food and drink again, but she was too tired to worry about that tonight. She had found a road. That was the important thing. It was old and unused, but it might take her somewhere. Of course, it might also peter out as the streams had, but she wouldn't think about that now. For now, she would allow herself to hope the road would take her where the streams had not. That night was hot and close. Hot and close. The humid edge of New England's short but sometimes fierce summer. Trisha fanned the neck of her grimy shirt against her grimy neck, stuck out her lower lip and blew hair off her forehead, then resettled her hat and lay back against her pack. She thought of digging out her Walkman and decided not to. If she tried listening to a West Coast game tonight, she'd fall asleep for sure and trash whatever was left of the batteries. She reclined further, turning the pack into a pillow, feeling something which had been so solidly gone that its return seemed miraculous. Simple contentment. "Thanks, God," she said. In 3 minutes, she was asleep. She woke up perhaps 2 hours later when the first cold drops of a drenching thunder shower found their way through the forest, overlacing and landed on her face. Then thunder cracked the world open, and she sat up gasping. The trees were creaking and groaning in a strong wind, almost a gale, and sudden lightning flashed them into a stark news photo relief. Trisha struggled to her feet, brushing her hair out of her eyes and then cringing as more thunder banged. Except it was more of a whip crack than a bang. The storm was almost directly overhead. She would shortly be drenched, trees or no trees. She grabbed up her pack and blundered back toward the dark, tilted hulk of the truck's cab. 3 steps and she stopped, gasping in the wet air and then coughing it out, hardly feeling the leaves and small branches that smacked her neck and arms in the gusty wind. Somewhere in the forest, a tree fell over with a rending, splintering crack. It was here. And very close. The wind changed direction, spattering her with a face full of rain, and now she could actually smell it, some rank, wild odor that made her think of cages at the zoo. Except the thing out there wasn't in a cage. Trisha began moving toward the truck cab again, holding one hand up before her to ward off whipping branches, and the other clapped to the top of her Red Sox cap to keep it on. Thorns tore at her ankles and calves, and when she came out of the sheltering woods to the edge of her road, so she thought of it as her road, she was instantly drenched. As she reached the driver's door of the cab, which hung open with vines twisting in and out through its socket of a window, lightning flashed again, painting the whole world purple. In its glare, Trisha saw something with slumped shoulders standing on the far side of the road, something with black eyes and great cocked ears like horns. Perhaps they were horns. It wasn't human, nor did she think it was animal. It was a god. It was her god, the wasp god, standing there in the rain. "No!" she screamed, diving into the truck, unmindful of the dusty cloud that puffed up around her and the upholstery's rotting ancient smell. "No, go away! Go away and leave me alone!" Thunder answered. Rain also answered, drumming down the cab's rusty roof. Trisha hid her head in her arms and rolled over on her side, coughing and shivering. She was still waiting for it to come when she fell asleep again. This sleep was deep and, as far as she could remember, dreamless. When she awoke, full daylight had returned. It was hot and sunny, the trees seemingly greener than they had been the day before, the grass lusher, the birds twitting away in the depths of the woods more complacently happy. Water rustled and dripped from leaves and branches. When Trisha raised her head and looked out through the tilted glassless rectangle where the old truck's windshield had been, the first thing she saw was sunlight glaring from the surface of a puddle in one of the road's ruts. The glare was so brilliant that she raised a hand to her eyes, squinting. The afterimage hung in front of her even when the real thing was gone, reflected sky, first blue, then a fading green. The truck's cab had kept her quite dry despite its lack of glass. There was a puddle on the floor around the ancient control pedals, and her left arm had gotten wet, but that was pretty much it. If she had coughed in her sleep, it hadn't been hard enough to wake her up. Her throat felt a little raw, and her sinuses were plugged, but those things might improve once she got out of the damned dust. It was here last night. You saw it. But had she? Had she really? It came for you. It meant to take you. Then you climbed into the truck and it decided not to, after all. I don't know why, but that's what happened. Maybe not, though. Maybe the whole thing had just been the sort of dream you could have when you were half awake and half asleep at the same time. Something brought on by waking up to a full-fledged thunderstorm with lightning flashing and the wind blowing a gale. A situation like that, anyone might see stuff. Trisha grabbed her pack by one slightly frayed strap and wriggled backward through the driver's side door hole, raising more dust and trying not to breathe it in. When she was out, she stepped away, still wet. The cab's rusty red surface had darkened to the color of plums, and started to put her pack on. Then she stopped. The day was bright and warm, but the rain was over. She had a road to follow. But all at once she felt old and tired and zero at the bone. People could imagine things when they woke up suddenly, especially when they woke up at the height of a thunderstorm. Of course they could. But she wasn't imagining what she saw now. While she slept, something had dug a circle through the leaves and needles and underbrush surrounding the abandoned truck cab. It was perfectly clear in the morning light, a curving line of wet black earth in the greenery. Bushes and small trees which had been in the way had been torn out by the roots and thrown aside in broken pieces. The god of the lost had come and drawn a circle around her as if to stay clear. She is mine. She is my property. So it's very weird, but it almost seems like something is protecting her as opposed to, like, trying to get her. She's, like, seeing it as this ominous thing, but, like, it didn't get her. And, like, I know she keeps interpreting it that, like, it's trying to continue scaring her. But, like, it also could be like, some of the things that she's describing sound kind of protective of, like, it watching her, like, watching over her while she slept. And then, like, it looks like basically almost like creating a protective circle over her. Because, like, even though the car didn't have any window any windows at all. She was still dry, like she barely got wet. And there was like absolute destruction around the truck. I don't know, it's interesting. So that's the end of that chapter, and we are on top of the 9th now. Trisha walked all that Sunday with the low, hazy sky beating down on her. In the morning, the wet woods steamed, but by early afternoon, they were dry again. The heat was immense. She was still glad of the road, but now she wished for shade as well. She felt feverish again, and not just tired, but outright exhausted. The thing was watching her, pacing her through the woods and watching her. The feeling didn't leave her this time because the thing didn't leave her. It was in the woods to her right. A couple of times she thought she actually saw it, but perhaps that was only the sun moving through the tree branches. She did not want to see it. She'd seen all that she'd wanted to see in that single flash of lightning the night before. The fur of it, the enormous cocked ears of it, the hulk of it, the eyes, too. Those black eyes, big and inhuman, glassy but aware of her. It won't leave until it's sure I can't get out, she thought wearily. It's not going to let that happen. It's not going to let me get away. Shortly after noon, she saw that the puddles in the road ruts were drying up and replenished her water supply while she could, straining the water through her hat and into the hood of her poncho, then pouring it into the plastic bottles. The water still had a hazy, dirty look, but such things no longer caused her much concern. She thought if woods water was going to kill her, she probably would have died when it first made her sick. What did concern her was a lack of food. She ate all but the last few nuts and berries after filling her bottles. By breakfast tomorrow, she would be scrounging at the bottom of the pack as she had scrounged for the last few potato chips. She might find more stuff alongside the road, but she wasn't hopeful. The road went on and on, sometimes fading a little and sometimes clarifying for a few hundred yards. For a while, bushes grew up in the crown between the ruts. Trisha thought they were blackberry bushes. They looked like the ones from which she and her mom had picked hatfuls of fresh sweet berries in the Sanford toy woods. But it was a month too early for blackberries. She also saw mushrooms, but did not trust in any enough to eat them. They weren't in her mother's field of knowledge, nor had they studied them in school. In school, they had learned about nuts and not taking rides from strangers, because some strangers were nuts, but not mushrooms. The one thing that she was sure of was that you would die, and horribly, if you ate the wrong kind. And skipping them was really no big sacrifice. She now had little appetite, and her throat was sore. What are you saying yeah to, by the way? I just saw that now. Oh, about the thing protecting her? Like, it seems like something's actually protecting her. Okay. Around 4 in the afternoon, she stumbled over a log, fell on her side, tried to get up, and found she couldn't. Her legs were trembling and felt as weak as water. She took off her pack, struggling with it for an alarming length of time, and finally got free of it. She ate all but the last 2 or 3 beech nuts, almost gagging up the last one she attempted. She fought for it and won, stretching her neck like a baby bird and double gulping. She tamped it down, at least for the time being, with a swig of warm, gritty water. Red Sox time, she muttered, and dug out her Walkman. She doubted if she could pick them up, but it wouldn't hurt to try. It would be 1 o'clock or so on the West Coast, a sure day game, and just starting. There was nothing at all on the FM band, not even a faint whisper of music. On the AM, she found a man babbling rapidly away in French. He chuckled as he did so, which was disquieting. All right. Ominous French. And then down near 1600, at the very foot of the dial, a miracle. Faint but audible, the voice of Joe Castiglione. All right, Valentin leads away from second, he said. The 3-1 pitch. And Garcia Parra hits a long high drive to deep center field. It's back. It's gone! Red Sox lead 2-0. Way to go, Nomar. You're the man, Trisha said in a hoarse, croaky voice she hardly recognized as her own and pumped her fist weakly in the sky. O'Leary struck out and the inning ended. Who do you call when your windshield's busted? Sang voices from the world far away. One where they, from a world far away, one where there were paths everywhere and all gods worked behind the scenes. 1-800, Trisha began. 54. She trailed off before she could finish. As her doze deepened, she slid further and further to her right, coughing from time to time. The coughs had a deep, phlegmy sound. During the fifth inning, something came to the edge of the woods and looked at her. Flies and no-see-ums made a cloud around its rudiment of a face. In the spacious brilliance of its eyes was a complete history of nothing. It stood there for a long time. At last it pointed at her with one razor-claw hand. She is mine. She is my property. And backed into the woods again. Interesting. Now we have, what was the lull about? Was that about the what's it called? Oh, the ominous French. I imagine that was the ominous French. We have a bottom of the ninth now. At some point late in the game, Trisha thought she came briefly, blearily awake. Jerry Trumpy, oh right, she left the radio on. No, she left the Walkman on. Jerry Truppiano was announcing. It sounded like Troop at least, but he was saying that the Seattle Monsters had the bases loaded and Gordon was trying to close the game out. That thing at the plate's a killer, Troop said. And Gordon looks afraid for the first time this year. Where's God when you need him, Joe? Danvers, Joe Castiglione said, crying real tis. Stupid, the Boston accent that I can't quite do. Surely that was a dream, had to have been, one that might or might not have been mixed with a little smidge of reality. All Trisha knew for sure was that when she next awoke completely, the sun was almost down. She was feverish, her throat hurt badly each time she swallowed, and her radio was ominously quiet. Fell asleep with it on, you stupid thing, she said in her new croaky voice. You big dumb asshole. She looked at the top of the case, hoping to see the little red light, hoping she had just moved the tuning by accident when she started sliding off to one side. She had awakened with her head cocked against one shoulder and her neck aching fiercely, knowing better. And sure enough, the red light was out. She tried to tell herself the batteries couldn't have lasted much longer anyway, but it didn't help, and she cried some more. Knowing the radio was dead made her feel sad, so sad. It was like losing your last friend. Moving slowly and creakily, she stowed the radio back in her pack, did the buckles, and put the pack back on. It was almost empty, yet somehow to weigh a ton. How could that be? I'm on a road at least, she reminded herself. I'm on a road. But now with the light of another day slipping out of the sky, not even that seemed to help. Road mode, she thought. The fact of it actually seemed to mock her, began to seem like a blown save opportunity somehow, like when a team got just an out or two away from sewing up the win, and then the roof fell in. The stupid road could go on through these woods for another 140 miles for all she knew, and at the end of it there might be nothing, just another scruff of bushes or another hideous bog. Nevertheless, she began to walk again slowly and wearily, with her head down and her shoulders so slumped that the pack straps kept trying to slide off like the straps of a shell did if the top was too big. Only with a shell top, you only had to brush the straps back up. With the pack straps, you first had to pick and then lift. About a half hour before full dark, one of them slipped off her shoulder entirely, and the pack came askew. Trisha thought briefly of just letting the damned thing fall and walking on without it. She might have done just that if there had only been the last handful of checkerberries inside. But there was the water, and the water, gritty as it was, soothed her throat. She decided to stop for the night instead. She knelt down on the crown of the road, slipped off the pack with a sigh of relief, then lay down with her head on it. She looked at the dark mass of the woods to her right. You just stay away, she said as clearly as she could. Stay away or I'll dial 1-800 and call the giant. Do you understand me? Something hurt her. it might or might not understand, and it did not reply, but it was there. She could feel it. Was it still letting her ripen, feeding on her fear before it came out to feed on her? If so, the game was almost over. She was nearly out of fear. She thought suddenly of calling to it again, of telling it that she didn't mean what she'd just said, that she was tired and it could come get her if it wanted. But she didn't do it. She was afraid that it might take her up on it if she did. She drank a little water and looked up at the sky. She'd thought of Bork the Dork, saying the god of Tom Gordon couldn't be bothered with her, that he had other fish to fry. Trisha doubted if that was exactly so, but he wasn't here. That seemed certain. Maybe it wasn't couldn't so much as wouldn't. Bork the Dork had also said, I must admit he is a sports fan. Not necessarily a Red Sox fan, however. Trisha took off her Red Sox cap, now battered and sweat-stained and smeared with bits of the forest, and ran her finger across the bent brim. Her best thing. Her father had gotten Tom Gordon to sign it for her, had sent it to Fenway Park with a letter saying Tom was his daughter's favorite player, and Tom, or his accredited representative, had sent it back in the stamped, self-addressed envelope her father had provided, autographed across the visor. She guessed it was still her best thing, other than some murky water, a handful of dried, tasteless berries, and her dirty clothes. It was just about her only thing. And now the signature was gone, blurred to nothing but a black shadow by rain and her own sweaty hands. But it had been there, and she was still here, for the time being at least. God, if you can't be a Red Sox fan, be a Tom Gordon fan, she said. Can you do that much at least? Can you be that much? She dozed in and out of consciousness all night, shivering, falling asleep, and then snapping awake, sure that it was there with her. That it had finally come out of the woods to take her. Tom Gordon spoke to her. Once her father also spoke to her. He stood right behind her, asking if she'd like some macaroons. But when she turned around, no one was there. More meteors burned across the sky, but she couldn't tell for sure if they were really there or if she was only dreaming them. Once she took out her radio, hoping the batteries had come back a little. Sometimes they did if you gave them a chance to rest. That is true. That does happen. But she dropped it into the high grass before she could check, and then couldn't find it no matter how much she combed her fingers through the tangles. Eventually, her hands returned to her pack, and she felt the straps still threaded snugly through the buckles. Trisha decided she had never taken the radio out in the first place because she never could have refixed the buckles and straps so neatly in the dark. She hacked her way through a dozen coughing fits, and now they hurt way down in her rib cage. At some point, she hoisted herself up enough to pee, and what came out was hot enough to burn and make her bite her lips. The night passed as nights of the deepening sickness always do. Time grew soft and strange, when the birds at least began to chirp, and she saw a little light beginning to strain through the trees. Trisha could hardly believe it. She lifted her hands and looked at her dirty fingers. She could hardly believe she was still alive, either, but it seemed she was. She stayed put until the day was light enough to see the ever-present cloud of bugs around her head. Then she got slowly up and waited to see if her legs were going to support her or give way and spill her back down again. If they do, I'll crawl, she thought. But she didn't have to crawl, not yet. They held her. She bent and hooked a hand into one of the pack straps. When she straightened back up again, dizziness roared through her, and a squadron of those black-winged butterflies clouded her sight. At last they faded, and she managed to get the pack on. Then there was another problem. Which way had she been going? She was no longer entirely sure, and the road looked the same in both directions. She stepped away from the log, looking uncertainly back and forth. Her foot clipped something. It was her Walkman, all tangled up in the earphone cord and wet with dew. Apparently she had taken it out after all. She bent down, picked it up, and looked at it stupidly again. Was she going to take off the pack again, open it, and put the Walkman back inside? That seemed too hard, on a par with moving a mountain. On the other hand, throwing it away seemed wrong, like admitting she had given up. Trisha stood where she was for 3 minutes or more, looking down at the little radio tape player with her fever-bright eyes. Throw it away or keep it. Throw it away or keep it. What's your decision, Patricia? Do you want to stick with the waterless cookware or go for the car, the mink coat, and the trip to Rio? It occurred to her that if she were her brother Pete's Mac PowerBook, she'd be throwing up error messages and little bomb icons all over the place. She was startled into a laugh at this image. The laughter almost immediately turned into coughing. It was the worst bout, by far, doubling her over. Soon she was barking like a dog with her hands planted just above her knees and her hanging hair swaying back and forth in a filthy curtain. She somehow kept her feet, refusing to give in and fall, and as the coughing fit tapered off, she realized that she ought to clip the Walkman to the waistband of her jeans. That was what the clip on the back of the case was for, wasn't it? Sure, you bet. What an El Dopo she was. She opened her mouth to say, "Elementary, dear Watson." She and Pepsi sometimes said that to each other. And when she did, something wet and warm came slobbering out over her lower lip. Oh, she wiped up a palmful of bright red blood and looked at it, her eyes widening. Oh, that's not good. I must have bit something in my mouth when I was coughing, she thought, and immediately knew better. This had come from deeper inside. That just really bothered me. This had come from deeper inside. The idea scared her, and fright brought the world into sharper focus. She found herself able to think again. She cleared her throat gently. It hurt too much to do it any other way, and then spat. Bright red. Oh, geez Louise, but there was nothing she could do about it now, and at least she was clear-headed enough to figure out how to make sure of her direction on the road. The sun had gone down on her right. She turned now until the rising sun was winking through the trees on her left, and immediately saw she was pointed the right way. She didn't know she could have been confused in the first place. Slowly, gingerly, like someone walking on a freshly rinsed tile floor, Trisha got moving again. This is probably it, she thought. Today's probably my last chance. Maybe even this morning's my last chance. I may be too weak and sick to walk by this afternoon, and if I can get on my feet after another night out here, it'll be a blue-eyed miracle. Blue-eyed miracle. Was that her mother's or her father's? Who gives a rat's ass, Trisha croaked. If I get out of this, I'm going to make up some sayings of my own. 50 or 60 feet north of the place where she had spent that endless summer night and Monday morning, Trisha realized she still had her Walkman in her right hand. She stopped and went carefully and laboriously about the task of getting it clipped to her waistband. Her jeans were absolutely floating on her now, and she could see the sharp jut of her hip bones. Lose a few more pounds and I'll be able to model the latest Paris fashion, she thought. She was just wondering what to do with the headphone attachment when a sudden rough rattle of distant explosions split the still morning air. It sounded like a puddle of soda being sucked up through a giant straw. Trisha cried out, and she was not alone in her startlement. A number of crows cawed, and a pheasant exploded through the brush in a ruffled whir of indignation. Trisha stood, wide-eyed, the forgotten earbud headphones penduluming at the end of their cord by her scabby, dirty left ankle. She knew that sound. It was the rattle of backfires through an old muffler, a truck maybe, or some kid's bucket of rods. There was another road up there, a real road. Good thinking about that direction. Good thinking about direction. She wanted to run and knew she must not. If she did, she would blow out all her energy in one burst. That would be dreadful. To faint away and perhaps die of exposure with an actual sound of traffic would be like blowing the save when the opposing team was down to their last strike. Such abominations happened, but she would not let it happen to her. She began to walk instead, forcing herself to move slowly and deliberately, listening all the while for another series of those rattling backfires, or a distant engine or a horn. There was nothing. Nothing at all, and after an hour of walking, she began to think that she hallucinated the whole thing. This hadn't seemed like a hallucination, but she topped a rise and looked down. She began coughing again, and more blood flew from her lips, bright in the sun, but Trisha took no notice, did not even put her hand up. Below her, the rutted track she was on ended T-squaring into a dirt road. Trisha walked slowly down slowly down and stood upon it. She could see no tire tracks, it was hardpan, but there were real ruts here, and no grass growing down the middle. The new road ran at right angles to her road, roughly east and west, and here, at last, Trisha made the right decision. She did not turn west for any other reason than that her head had begun to ache again, and she didn't want to be walking directly into the sunshine. But she did turn west. 4 miles from where she stood, New Hampshire Route 96, a patched ribbon of hot top ran through the woods. A few cars and a great many pulp trucks used this road. It was one of the latter which Tricia had heard backing off through its ancient exhaust system as the driver downshifted for a humongous hill. The sound had carried better than 9 miles through the still morning air. She began to move again, and with a new feeling of strength. It was perhaps 45 minutes later that she heard something distant but unmistakable. Don't be stupid. You've gotten to a place where anything's mistakable. Perhaps so, but she cocked her head like a dog on Grandma McFarland's old records. She cocked her head like the dog on Grandma McFarland's old records. The ones Grandma kept up in her attic. She held her breath. She heard the thump of blood in her temples, the wheeze of her breath in her infected throat, the call of birds, the rustle of the breeze. She heard the hum of mosquitoes around her ears, and another hum as well, the hum of tires on pavement, very distant, but there. Trisha began to cry. Please don't let me be making it up, she said in a husky voice that was now down to a little more than a whisper. Oh, God, please don't let me be making that up. A louder, rustling noise commenced behind her. Not the breeze, not this time. Even as she might have convinced herself for a few cruddy seconds or so that it was, what about the snapping sound of branches, and then the grinding, splintering sound of something falling, a small tree probably that had been in its way. It had let her get this close to rescue, had allowed her to come within actual hearing of the path that she had so casually and carelessly lost. It had watched her painful progress, perhaps with amusement, perhaps with some sort of God's compassion that was too terrible to even think about. Now it was through watching, through waiting. Slowly, both with terror and with a strange sort of calm inevitability, Trisha turned to face the God of the lost. And now we're on to bottom of the ninth, save situation. Yeah, Yeah, it was very lucky for her to turn that way. It emerged from the trees on the left side of the road, and Trisha's first thought was, is that all? Is that all it ever was? Grown men would have turned and run from the Ursus americanus, which lumbered out of the last screen of bushes. It was fully grown North American black bear, perhaps 400 pounds, but Trisha had been prepared for some awful horror torn from the underside of the night. It is weird that it was a bear all this time that just left her alone, but just happened to be on the same path that she was. Interesting. There were leaves and burdocks caught in its shiny fur and held in one hand. Yes, it had a hand. The clawed rudiment of one, at least, was a branch from which most of the bark had been stripped. It was like this woodsy wand or scepter. It came to the middle of the road, seeming almost to paddle from side to side. It remained on all fours for a moment, and then, with a soft grunt, rose to stand on its rear legs. When it did, Trisha saw it was not a black bear at all. She had been right the first time. It looked a little like a bear, but it was really the god of the lost, and it had come for her. It peered at her with black eyes that were not eyes at all, but only sockets. Its tan muzzle scented at the air, and then it raised the broken branch it held to its mouth. The muzzle wrinkled back, revealing a double row of huge green-stained teeth. It sucked at the end of the branch, reminding her a little of a kid with a lollipop. Then, with great deliberation, the teeth clenched upon it and tore it in two. The wood had fallen silent, and she heard the sound its teeth made very clearly, a sound like splintering bone. It was the sound her arm would make if that thing bit down on it, when it bit down on it. It stretched its neck, its ears flicking, and Trisha saw it moved in its own small dark galaxy of minges and oseams, just as she did. Its shadow, long in the morning light, stretched almost to Trisha's scuffed sneakers. They were no more than 60 feet apart. It had come for her. "Run," called the god of the lost. "Run from me. Race me to the road. This bear's body is slow, not yet filled with the summer's forage. Pickings have been slim. Run. Perhaps I'll let you live." Yes, run, she thought, and then immediately came the cold voice of the tough Tootsie. "You can't run. You can barely stand up, sweetheart." The thing that wasn't a bear stood looking at her, ears flicking at the bugs which surrounded its big triangular head, sides shining with healthy fur. It held the stump of its stick in one clawed paw. Its jaws moved with ruminative slowness, and little shredded splinters dribbled out between its teeth. Some fell, some stuck to its muzzle. Its eyes were sockets lined with minuscule buzzing flies, like maggots and wriggling baby flies. Minuscule buzzing life. Maggots and wriggling baby flies, mosquito larvae, and God knows what else, a living soup that made her think of the swamp she had walked through. "I killed the deer. I watched you and drew my circle around you. Run from me. Worship me with your feet, and I may let you live." The woods lay silent all about them, breathing their sour, urgent scent of green. Her breath rasped softly in and out of her sick throat. The thing that looked like a bear gazed down on her haughtily from its 7 feet of height. Its head was in the sky, and its claws held the earth. Trisha looked back at it, up at it, and understood what she must do. She must close. "It's God's nature to come on into the bottom of the ninth," Tom had told her. And what was the secret to closing? Establishing who was better. You could be beaten, but you must not beat yourself. First, though, you had to create that stillness, the one that came from the shoulders and spun about the body until it was a cocoon of certainty. You could be beaten, but you must not beat yourself. You couldn't serve up a fat pitch, and you couldn't run. "Ice water," she said, and the thing standing in the middle of the dirt road tilted its head so it looked like an enormous listening dog. It cocked its ears forward. Trisha reached up, turned her cap to the right way around, and pulled the curved visor low on her brow, wearing it the way Tom Gordon did. Then she pivoted her body so it was facing the right side of the road and took a step forward so her legs were apart. Her left leg pointed at the bear thing. Her face remained turned toward it as she stepped. She fixed her gaze on the eye sockets, looking through the dancing cloud of bugs. It all comes down to this," Joe Castiglione said. "Everybody fasten your seatbelts." Come on, if you're coming," Trisha called to it. She pulled the Walkman off the waistband of her jeans, yanked the cord free, and dropped the earbuds at her feet. The Walkman went behind her back, and she began to turn it in her fingers, looking for the right grip. "I've got ice water in my veins, and I hope you freeze on the first bite." "Come on, you busher! Batter fucking up!" The bear thing let go of its stick and then dropped back onto all fours. It pawed at the hard-pan surface of the road like a restless bull, digging up clods of earth with its claws, and then moved toward her, waddling with surprising, deceptive speed. As it came, it laid its flat ears against its skull. Its muzzle wrinkled back, and from within its mouth, Trisha heard a droning sound which she recognized at once. Not bees, but wasps. It had taken the shape of a bear on the outside, but on the inside it was truer. Inside it was full of wasps. Of course it was. Hadn't the black robe by the stream been its prophet? "Run," it said as it came towards her, its big hindquarters swaying from side to side. It was weirdly graceful, leaving clawed prints behind and a scatter of droppings on the surface of the packed earth. "Run! It's your last chance!" Except it was stillness that was her last chance. Stillness and maybe a good hard curveball. Trisha put her hands together, coming to the set. The Walkman no longer felt like a Walkman. It felt like a baseball. There were no Fenway faithful here, rising to their feet in the Boston Church of Baseball, no rhythmic clapping, no umpires, and no bat boy. There was only her and the green stillness and the hot morning sunshine and a thing that looked like a bear on the outside and was full of wasps on the inside. Only stillness, and now she understood how someone like Tom Gordon must feel, standing in the set position in the silence of the cyclone's core, where all pressure falls to zero and all sounds are shut out, and it all comes down to this: fasten your seatbelts. She stood in the set position and let the stillness spin out around her. Yes, it came from the shoulders. Let it eat her. Let it beat her. It could do both. But she would not beat herself. And it won't run. It stopped before her and stretched its neck up so its face approached her face as if to kiss. There were no eyes, only squirming circles, wor- um, wormhole universes filled with breeding bugs. They hummed and squirmed and jostled each other for position in the tunnels that bored towards the god's unimaginable brain. Its mouth opened, and she saw that its throat was lined with wasps, plump, ungainly poison factories crawling over the remains of a chewed stick and the pinkish lump of deer gut that served as its tongue. Its breath was the muddy stink of the bog. She saw these things, noted them briefly, then looked beyond. Varitek flashed the sign. Varitek flashed the sign. Soon she would make her pitch, but for now, she was still. She was still. Let the batter wait, anticipate, lose his timing, let him wonder, begin to think his guess about the curve was wrong. The bear creature sniffed delicately all around her face. Bugs crawled in and out of its nostrils. No seams fluttered between the two locked faces, one furry and the other smooth. Minges flicked against the damp surfaces of Trisha's open, unblinking eyes. The thing's rudiment of a face was shifting and changing, always shifting and changing. It was the face of teachers and friends. It was the face of parents and brothers. It was the face of the man who might come and offer you a ride when you were walking home from school. Stranger danger was what they had been taught in the first grade. Stranger danger. It stank of death and disease and everything random. The hum of its poisoned works was, she thought, the real subaudible. It rose up on its back legs again, swaying a little as if to beast music only it could hear, and then it swatted at her. Yet it was playful, only playful as yet, missing her face by several inches. The passage of its earth-darkened claws breezed the hair off her forehead. The hair settled back light as milkweed puffs, but Trisha did not move. She stood in the set position, looking through the bear's underbelly, where a bluish-white blaze of fur grew in a shape like a lightning bolt. Look at me. No. Look at me! It was as if unseen hands had grasped her beneath the angles of her jaw. Slowly, not wanting to but helpless to resist, Trisha raised her head. She looked up. She looked into the bear thing's empty eyes and understood it meant to kill her no matter what. Courage was not enough. But so what? If a little courage was all you had, so what? It was time to close. Without thinking about it, Trisha brought her left foot back against her right one and went into motion. Not the one went into her motion, not the one her dad had taught her in the backyard, but the one she'd learned on TV watching Gordon. When she stepped forward again and raised her right hand to her right ear, and then beyond, really rearing back because this would be no lazy off-speed pitch, no eephus. Eephus? Eephus? This was going to be the heartbreaker, the serious bent cheese. The bear thing took a clumsy, overbalanced step backward. Did the squirming things which lent its dim vision register the baseball in her hand as a weapon? Or was it the threatening, aggressive motion which startled it, the raised hand, the stepping forward when she should have been stepping back and turning to run? It didn't matter. The thing grunted in what might have been perplexity. A little cloud of wasps puffed out of its mouth like living vapor. It waved one furry foreleg in an effort to keep its balance. As it struggled to stay on its feet, a shot rang out. The man in the woods that morning, the first human being to see Trisha McFarland in 9 days, was too shaken to even try lying to the police about why he had been in the woods with a high-powered autoload rifle. He'd been in the market for an out-of-season deer. His name was Travis Herrick, and he didn't believe in spending money on food if he didn't have to. There were too many other important things to spend money on, lottery tickets and beer, for instance. In any case, he was never tried for anything or even fined, and he did not kill the creature he saw standing in front of the little girl, who faced it so still and so brave-like. If she'd have moved when it first come up to her, it would have tore her apart, Herrick said. It's a wonder it didn't tear her apart anyways. She must have stared it down, just like Tarzan in them old jungle movies. I come over the rise and see two of them. I must have stood there watching them for 20 seconds at least. Might even have been a minute. You lose all track of time in a situation like that, but I couldn't shoot. They is too close together. I was afraid of hitting the girl. Then she moved. She had something in her hand, and she went to throw it at him almost like she was pitching a baseball. Her moving like that startled it. It stepped back and kind of lost its balance. I knew right there was the only chance that little girl had, so I lifted up my gun and I shot. No trial, no fine. What Travis Herrick got was his own floatin' Grafton Notch's 1998 4th of July parade. Yeah, baby. Trisha heard the gunshot, knew it at once for what it was, and saw the thing's cocked ears suddenly fly apart at the very tip like a piece of shredded paper. She could see momentary squiglets of blue sky through the torn flaps. She also saw a scatter of red droplets, no bigger than checkerberries, fly into the air in an arc. At the same instant, she saw that the bear was just a bear again, its eyes big and glassy and almost comically surprised. Or perhaps it had been a bear all along, except she knew better than that. She continued with her motion, flinging the baseball. It struck the bear dead bang between the eyes, and whoa, hey, talk about hallucinations. She saw a couple of Energizer AA batteries fall out onto the road. Strike 3 called! She screamed, and at the sound of her hoarse, triumphant, breaking voice, the wounded bear turned and fled, lumbering on all fours, quickly picking up speed, shedding blood from its torn ear as it got into an all-out fanny-wagging run. There was another whip-crack shot, a gunshot, and Trisha felt the slug buffet the air as it passed less than a foot to her right. It dug up a puff of road dust well behind the bear, which veered on its left and plunged back into the woods. For a moment, she could see the gleam of its shiny black pelt, then small trees shaking as if in a parody of fear as it passed among them, and then the bear was gone. She turned, staggering, and saw a small man in patched green pants, green gum rubber boots, and an old flapping t-shirt running towards her. His head was bald on top, long hair flopping down on either side and hung on his shoulders. Little rimless eyeglasses flashed in the sun. He was carrying a rifle high over his head like a raiding Indian in an old movie. She wasn't a bit surprised to see that his shirt had the Red Sox emblem on it. Every man in New England had at least one Sox shirt, it seemed. "Hey, girlie," he screamed. "Hey, girlie, Jesus, are you all right? Christ almighty, that was a fucking bear. Are you all right?" Trisha staggered towards him. "Strike 3 called," she said, but the words hardly reached beyond her own mouth. She had used up most of what she had with that last scream. All that remained was a kind of bleeding whisper. "Strike 3 called. I threw the curve and just froze him." "What?" He stopped in front of her. "I can't make you out, honey. Come again?" "Did you see?" she asked, meaning the pitch she had thrown, that unbelievable curve that hadn't just broken, but snapped like a whip. "Did you see it?" I saw." But in truth, he didn't know what he had seen. There had been a few seconds in that frozen time when the girl and the bear had been regarding each other that he hadn't been sure, not entirely sure it was a bear, but that he never told anyone. Folks knew he drank. They would think he was crazy. And all he saw now was a delirious little girl who looked like nothing but a stick figure held together by dirt and ragged clothes. He couldn't remember her name, but he knew who she was. It had been on the radio and the TV as well. He had no idea how she could possibly have gotten so far north and west, but he knew perfectly well who she was. Trisha stumbled over her own feet and would have fallen to the road if Herrick hadn't caught her. When he did, his rifle, a .350 Krag, that was the pride of his life, discharged again close to her ear, deafening her. Trisha hardly noticed. It all seemed normal somehow. "Did you see?" she asked again, not able to hear her own voice, not even completely sure if she was actually speaking. The little man looked bewildered and scared and not especially bright, but she thought he also looked kind. "I got him with the curve, froze him. Did you see?" His lips were moving, but she couldn't tell what he was saying. He put the rifle down on the road, though, and that was a relief. He picked her up and turned her so fast it made her dizzy. She probably would have thrown up if there had been anything left in her stomach. She began to cough. She couldn't hear that either, not with the monstrous ringing in her ears, but she could feel it way down in her chest and rib cage pulling. She wanted to tell him she was glad to be carried, glad to be rescued, but she also wanted to tell him that the bear thing had been backing away even before he fired his gun. She had seen the bewilderment in its face, had seen the fear of her when she went from the set to the motion. She wanted to tell this man who was now running with her one very important thing, but he was jouncing her and she was coughing and her head was ringing and she couldn't tell if she was saying it or not. Trisha was still trying to say, I got it. I caught the save when she passed out. Descriptive of like with the bear thing. It was interesting because like it kind of encompassed her whole journey with like what was happening with it, what it looked like at different parts of itself. So we're on the post game now. Let me take a drink of water before I continue. Hold on. Important to keep hydrated, everybody. I hope you've been drinking when I've been drinking. I forget to announce that now that we're not doing Hot Double Boyfriend anymore, but okay. So, yeah, we're on the post game. She was in the woods again, and she came to a clearing she knew. Standing in the middle of it, by the stump that wasn't a stump, but a gatepost with a rusty ring bolt embedded in the top, was Tom Gordon. He was idly flicking the ring bolt back and forth. I already had this dream, she thought. But as she approached him, she saw it had changed in one particular. Instead of the gray road uniform, Tom was wearing his white home uniform with number 36 on the back in bright red silk. So the road trip was over. The Sox were at Fenway again, back at home, and the road trip was over. Except she and Tom were here. They were back in this clearing. Tom? She said timidly. He looked at her, eyebrows raised. Back and forth went the rusty ring bolt between his talented fingers. Back and forth. I closed. I know you did, honey, he said. You did a good job. Back and forth, back and forth. Who do you call when your ring bolt's busted? How much of it was real? All of it, he said, as if it didn't really matter. And then, again, you did a really good job. I was stupid to get off the path like I did, wasn't I? He looked at her with slight surprise, then pushed up his cap with the hand that wasn't flipping the ring bolt back and forth. He smiled, and when he smiled, he looked young. What path? He said. Trisha? That was a woman's voice coming from behind her. It sounded like her mother's voice, but what would Mom be doing out here in the woods? She probably doesn't hear you, said another woman. This voice she didn't know. Trisha turned. The woods were darkening, the shapes of the trees blurring together, becoming unreal like a backdrop. Shapes moved there, and she felt a momentary prick of fear. The Wasp Priest, she thought. It's the Wasp Priest. He's coming back. Then she realized she was dreaming, and the fear passed. She turned back to Tom, but he was no longer there. Only the splintered post with the ring bolt in the top, and his warm-up jacket lying in the grass, Gordon printed across the back. She glimpsed him on the far side of the clearing, a white shape like a ghost. Trisha, what's God's nature? He called. To come on in the bottom of the ninth, she wanted to say, but no sound came out. Look, her mother said, her lips are moving. Trish? That was Pete, sounding anxious and hopeful. Trish, are you awake? She opened her eyes, and the woods rolled away into some darkness which would never entirely leave her now. What path? She was in a hospital room. There was a thing up her nose and something else, a tube, running into her hand. Her chest felt very heavy, very full. Standing by her bed was her father, her mother, her brother. Behind them, looming large and white, was the nurse who had said, she probably doesn't hear you. Trisha, her mom said. She was crying. Trisha saw that Pete was also crying. Trisha, honey, oh, honey. She took Trisha's hand, the one without the thing in it. Trisha tried to smile, but her mouth was too heavy to go up, even at the corners. She moved her eyes and saw her Red Sox hat on the seat of the chair by her bed. Smeared across the visor was a dim, blackish-gray shadow. Once it had been Tom Gordon's signature. "Dad," she tried to say. Nothing came out but a cough. It was only a little cough, but it hurt enough to make her wince. "Don't try to talk, Patricia," the nurse said, and Tricia could tell both by the nurse's tone and posture that she wanted the family out of here. In another moment, she would make them leave. "You're a sick girl. You've got pneumonia. Both lungs." Her mom seemed to hear none of this. She was sitting on the bed beside her now, stroking Tricia's wasted arm. She wasn't sobbing, but tears welled steadily from her eyes and rolled down her cheeks. Pete stood next to her, crying in the same silent fashion. Tricia was touched by his tears in a way she wasn't by her mother's, but she still thought Pete looked quite remarkably dorky. Beside him, beside the chair, stood her dad. This time Tricia didn't try to speak, only fixed her father with her eyes, and mouthed it again, very carefully. "Dad." When he saw and bent forward. "What, honey? What is it?" "I think that's enough," the nurse said. "All her signs are up, and we don't want that. She's had all the excitement she needs for a while. If you'll just help me out now. Help her out." Mom got to her feet. "We love you, Tricia. Thank God you're safe. We'll be here, but you need to sleep now. Larry, let's..." He took no notice of Keela. He remained bent over Tricia, fingers lightly tented on the sheet. "What is it, Trish? What do you want?" She moved her eyes to the chair, to her face, back to the chair. He looked quite puzzled. She wasn't sure she was sure he wasn't going to get it, and then his face cleared. He smiled, turned, picked up the hat, and tried to put it on her head. She raised the hand her mother had caressed. It weighed a ton, but she managed. Then she opened the fingers, closed them, opened them. "Okay, hun. Okay, right." He put the cap in her hand, and when she closed her fingers on the visor, he kissed them. Tricia began to cry at that, as soundlessly as her mother and brother. "All right," the nurse said. "That's it. You'll really have to..." Tricia looked at the nurse and shook her head. "What?" the nurse asked. "What now? Goodness sake!" Tricia slowly transferred the cap to the hand with the IV needle in it. She looked at her father as she did it, making sure he was looking at her. She was tired. Soon she would sleep, but not yet. Not until she said what she had to say. He was watching closely. Good. She reached across her body with her right hand, never taking her eyes off from her father, because he was the one who would know. If he understood, he would translate. Tricia tapped the visor of her cap, then pointed her right index finger up at the ceiling. The smile which lit his face from the eyes down was the sweetest, truest thing she had ever seen. If there was a path, it was there. Tricia closed her own eyes on his understanding and floated away into sleep. Game over. Yeah. We have the end of the book. There is a small postscript from Stephen King. If you wanted me to read that too, it's like a full page and like 3 lines on the next page. I'll do that really quickly because I guess why not? So first, I took some liberties with the Red Sox's 1998 schedule. Small ones, I assure you. We don't even know, Mr. King, but thank you. I'm sure there's someone out there that does know, some big baseball fan. There is a real Tom Gordon who does indeed pitch in the closer's role for the Boston Red Sox, but the Gordon in this story is fictional. The impressions fans have of people who have achieved some degree of celebrity are always fictional, and I can attest to my own personal experience. In one particular, the real Gordon and Tricia's version of him are the same. Both point skyward after the final out of a successful save has been recorded. In 1998, Tom Flash Gordon recorded 44 saves to lead the American League. 43 of them came consecutively, an American League record. Gordon's season came to an unfortunate conclusion, however, as Bork the Dork says. God may be a sports fan, but he doesn't seem to be a Red Sox fan. In Game 4 of the divisional playoff against the Indians, Gordon surrendered 3 hits and 2 runs. The Red Sox lost 2-1. It was Gordon's first blown save in 5 months, and it ended the Red Sox 1998 season. It did not, however, distract from Gordon's extraordinary accomplishments. Without those 44 saves, the Red Sox probably would have finished fourth in their division instead of winning 91 games and compiling the American League's second-best record in 1998. There's a saying, one that most closers like Tom Gordon would probably agree with: some days you eat the bear, and some days the bear eats you. The things Trisha eats to stay alive can indeed be found in the woods in northern New England during the late spring season. Had she not been a town girl, she might have found lots more supplies, more nuts, roots, and cattails. My friend Joe Floyd helped me with this part of it, and it was Joe who told me that fiddleheads grow right into early July in the marshes of the northern backwoods. The woods themselves are real. If you should visit them on your vacation, bring a compass, bring good maps, and try to stay on the path. And there we go. We finished the book! How exciting. So, what do you guys think? Also, please go ahead if you'd like and give a like to this video just to show your support and that you've been liking the book and all the content that you've seen so far. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah, don't get lost in the woods. It's not very much fun. We also have I mean, smartphones aren't going to help you everywhere. But that would be a slightly better advantage than what Trisha had to contend with. We have some more technology, which would help. And I'm sure there's also stuff that like you would just bring camping these days that would help you out even more in that kind of case. Yeah. It's all the sports lingo, although as much as that's annoying, it's in character. I really can't fault it for that because it makes sense. She's a huge sports fan, so it makes sense that the book is littered with sports analogies and terms. My critiques are that it doesn't really get in, like, it gets into her head and then it doesn't, and it's like I can never tell who the narrator exactly is because of that. Yeah, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would too. That's one of my critiques. I have a critique about like sports, as annoying as the references are for sports, the games don't change that much over the course of like history in terms of like its rules and like the parts of the game and so as annoying as it may be, it's still fairly understandable to anyone who's looking at it. But the cultural references and the pop culture references, there's just way too many that I just can't keep track of with that. Yeah. It's like a little too much for me. I would like to think that it actually was a creature, because if I think that it was just a bear that happened to, I feel really bad, even though like obviously I don't want a child to be eaten by a bear either. But to me, everything happening, it didn't make sense that it was an animal. Like these things could have been done by animals, but there was a lot of behavior described and attributed to this thing, and granted it may not have just been one thing, but it didn't make sense for all of that stuff to be happening. For if it was one thing, it didn't make sense for me if it was a wild animal, because it just didn't hold up, if that makes sense. Like it's not going to stalk you for weeks. Well, it wasn't weeks, it was days. But it's not going to stalk you for days on end. Actually, it was over a week at least. Because I remember she remembered that it was like the 1 week anniversary of getting lost at one point. So it didn't make sense that something would play such a long game like that. Not many creatures do that besides man. Um, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of stuff that, like, exists now that I think would have made it a, what's it called? Oh, no, I know it didn't get killed. I know it didn't get killed, but scaring it and stuff, I like animals, so frightening it so and, like, shooting it and hurting it when it kinda gave her a warning to leave and she just didn't. Um, but yeah, I think that it's possible because, yeah, she could have been hallucinating at that point, and we don't know. But I will say that it again, based on the other things that happened in the story, I would say that it was an actual thing. Oh, I didn't realize that each day was an inning. Is that true? Because I didn't think that like it was like I know they talked about days passing and stuff, but I didn't notice that it was like one to a chapter. I didn't think that that was the case. Or not even one to a chapter, but one to an inning because there were some chapters like some of the innings went over one chapter, like beyond one chapter. You think that the bear thing hesitated because she wasn't well? Like, I don't know, did do I wanna eat it or, like, do do I wanna chance it or not? Woo. Well, yeah, it was an interesting book. Um, there's certain parts that, like, really bothered me, like, when she was coughing up blood, that really, really made me uncomfortable. Um mhm. Mm. No, it's okay. I knew that stuff makes me uncomfortable, but, like, I didn't realize, like, how uncomfortable. But, like, no one else could know that if I didn't know that, so, um but yeah. Are there any other comments about the book? I hope that, going forward, like, things with their family are patched up. Like, we've talked about this before, I don't hope that her mother and father get back together exactly, but I do hope that they're on better terms now. Um, I hope that her mother pays more attention to her. I hope that she, like, confronts them about having to be a mediator and, like, lie about her own feelings for the sake of peace. Like, I hope that that's something that, that will help out and then, that will be resolved rather, and I hope that, her father will hopefully be a little better with his drinking and, like, not yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I didn't know what she was I had this feeling that it might be pneumonia at one point when they mentioned the her cough getting worse and worse and phlegmy and her lungs feeling heavy. But also when she was, like, coughing up the blood, like, it's just bad if you're coughing up blood. That's just it's a bad thing. Um, and so I was like, "Oh, yeah, she's, like, about to die." Like, Ah, um, but yeah, I do hope that they're better at co-parenting too. Yeah. Um, Trying to think of like other things. Oh, yeah, I don't think I have any other comments right now. Um, I think we're kind of done for this time. Hey, we're on the same wavelength. Um, so yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. If there's nothing else, I'm gonna go ahead and close us out. That's none. Of course. I really enjoy doing this stuff because it does expose it helps me like expose other people to books that they might not have otherwise read, but it also helps me get exposed to these books too. And it, like I've said before, and my whole reason for making this was I've wanted to read more for a very long time, and it's just so hard to find the time and the focus and the motivation and like it's just really difficult. So I'm really glad to be able to create this opportunity for at least myself. Um and I'm glad that it helps you guys too. Um I am happy you guys enjoyed. Like I said again, I will go ahead and post the link to the poll for our next book in the description once I go ahead and update that. Um, and I will call that soon. So go ahead and get your votes in as soon as possible, and we'll see what book we're reading next. Most likely, it's going to be Stardust by Neil Gaiman. I'm really excited about that. Love that book. That one I have read. It's been a while, but I have read it, and I remember really, really enjoying it and just enjoying the writing of it and the script descriptions and stuff. Um, so yeah, go ahead, get your votes in, and I'll see you guys next week with our next book. And we'll see what that one is soon. I'll let you guys know when we know. Please go ahead and give this video a like if you can. It really matters and, just lets me know that you guys are enjoying what you're seeing. Please go ahead and leave a comment if you'd like. I appreciate hearing what you think. If you have any questions after the fact, that is the place to put it. You can go ahead and answer that. And it just lets me know that you are interested in what we're doing and that we should keep it up. Go ahead, please, and do that. And otherwise, I will see you next week at 5. Hopefully, it'll be 5 and not 6, but we will see how it goes for our next book. In the meantime, this has been Sky. Bye bye.